Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Woman's Splain. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we're going to talk about a really interesting phenomenon in women in leadership called the glass cliff.
Very topical. We've seen it in the news recently with women CEOs or execs who are quitting their jobs that they've been, working at for a long time. So we'd love to delve into that, have some case studies, talk about the implications and what, corporations can do to mitigate that. So let's start by first talking about what is the glass cliff?
Yeah, the glass cliff, I don't know if you want to define it, but it's effectively the idea that there's kind of two parts. One, when female CEOs are often basically placed at the helm of a company that's failing. And so they're basically put on effectively a cliff that they're going to fall off. And so instead of kind of the glass ceiling, they replaced it with the glass cliff. So an example of this is Indra when she was placed as CEO of Pepsi back in 1994. It was actually the first female CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Pepsi was not in a good spot. Their covenants have been busted. They had debtors who were threatening to take over the company. They'd lost a ton of market share. They had made a few very poor acquisitions. And Indra was put in as CEO. And maybe she would have been put in the CEO anyway. We don't know. And she ended up being Pepsi's probably most successful and longest serving.
Yeah, she really turned
CEO.
The company around.
She's fantastic. She's an absolute legend. Has a great book out now actually about her experience. But when she first took the helm, she did some pretty controversial things. She sold off and divested a lot of potential acquisitions. She laid off people. She really righted Pepsi back and kind of refocused to its core platform. But that's an example of effectively when a company is failing, often women are thrown into as a CEO. And I think an example that's more topical today is Jane Fraser and Citi.
Yep.
Who was basically the first CEO of a large bank.
First female
on Wall Street. Yeah, first female CEO of a large bank on Wall Street. She's also a legend. She was head of consumer banking at Citi before. Has been at Citi I think since 2004. Rose up the ranks and became CEO in 2020. And Citi's obviously been going through some issues and changes, like a lot of banks right now. Yeah. But really, I think this phenomenon is named because often when companies are in trouble, the qualities that a board or employees are looking for in a leader are stereotypically more female, nurturing, empathetic, creative, problem solver. Sort of these aspects that are described when a company is in trouble are assigned more to women versus when a company is thriving. The attributes people are looking for a leader are things like aggressive, growth-oriented, sharp, things that are change, things that are actually associated more with men, which is obviously unfair, and women can, do either. But the issue with this is that a lot of times women who are thrown in as a leader the first time are set up to fail.
Yeah, research shows that this is, just subconscious because of all the different adjectives you were talking about with women being nurturing, being problem solvers, problem fixers. And once they're in this type of role and, if they are able to turn the business around like Indra Nooyi, then they are, praised, probably not as much as men, but when they fail, they are, ousted from their position. So something that happened a couple of weeks ago, early February, was at Goldman Sachs. There was a woman named Beth Hammack who was the co-head of the global financing group. She's been at Goldman for 30 years and she abruptly had quit. And I remember reading that article and we talked about it. It was a couple of weeks ago now. And she was the only female leader that was kind of poised to become the next CFO. She was actually in 2021 fighting for that role over a man, and she ended up not getting that. And the C-suite had placed her into this co-head of the financing group, saying that this is a good opportunity for her. She needs more experience running an investment group, which obviously didn't end up happening because she's been in that role for 3 years now. And it's something that I find really interesting is that the fact that she has been at Goldman for 30 years, she was really celebrated as one of the best female leaders. And Goldman does, and a lot of Wall Street banks have all these initiatives these days on promoting women in terms of recruiting, retention, and there's a lot of really great programs that do this. But at the end of the day, when we're looking at top executives, I'm going to keep talking about Goldman because that's the example, but they've never had a female CEO, a president, or anyone in the C-suite. So it's really interesting that, you know, a lot of these companies are trying to kind of fix that gender inequality issue from a grounds up level in terms of recruiting and having these, you know, minority programs or female programs with these like new joiner type of after college programs. But when we're looking at C-suite levels and the management level, that doesn't really translate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I also similar to that, which is super I mean, obviously they lost like probably the most impressive, most brilliant. I mean, the like her male colleagues and female colleagues called her brilliant. She literally rose up the ranks in both banking and trading.
Yeah.
She's like the only leader to do that. She also like co-head of financing during a fucking downturn.
Yeah.
Is such a hard job. Like literally, I mean, and Goldman was having problems. Okay. Like literally they eliminated their venture group. Their platform solutions, like Marcus, like is not doing well. And her being able to like manage that and steer that with also like no appreciation, is really difficult. And I think honestly, they lost probably one of their most valuable people and they know that. But like kind of going off this idea of just it being so difficult to be promoted, I actually read an article called like McKinsey came out, but it's actually called instead of the glass ceiling, the broken rung, where women like enter at a junior level pretty much at the same level as men for like these highly competitive roles. But the most difficult promotion for women is from basically junior to like mid-levels, like making that VP director role. But the women who do actually make it have a really high percentage chance of becoming a senior leader. But like that is the point where like the vast majority of women are ousted of their companies. It's the most difficult promotion for women, and it's a huge, huge problem with the amount of women that get to director.
Right.
And so it's actually like, I think banks and consulting firms, et cetera, are kind of attacking this problem in the wrong way. I do think obviously like having programs to get women in at the bottom in any way is obviously great, but there needs to be like actual promotion at the mid-level. And there needs to be like continued like adherence and responsibility and retention, like when women are basically about 10 years into their career. And that is when like a lot of women are falling out. And like also and I think that's also why like, you know, I think there's a lot of talk around like women's salaries and things like that are saying like, oh, well, women leave the workforce because of like children, et cetera, et cetera. But honestly, like around in your early 30s is usually when that mid-level promotion happens. And a lot of women are just being ousted. Yeah. And like, honestly, probably having issues breaking back in. It also does happen to be around the time most women do have children. So it's like this difficult thing that's actually like, people are blaming women leaving to have children, but I actually think companies are just not promoting them and they're leaving. Yeah. And so I think the question is, how can we really attack women, really like the issue of having women in senior leadership roles? And I think it's actually focusing on women in the mid-level.
I agree. I totally agree with that. And I feel like the reason that women can't kind of break through that glass ceiling of the middle level is because there's no one at the top helping them and being their sponsor. So I remember like when I was reading the article about Beth Hammack, a lot of the Goldman execs were saying that she lacked swagger and that's the reason why she couldn't go like become CFO. But now women are in this lose-lose situation of, okay, let's say she has a lot of swagger, as they say, then she's like seen as too aggressive. And if she doesn't have that, then she's not the typical type of leader archetype. So I feel like it's really hard for women to kind of play both sides. And something that I think about a lot is seeing these women that have thrived in these top level positions. And a lot of the times I feel like they kind of have to mask into this masculine personality and kind of be one of the boys or one of the men just to kind of survive. It's like a survival mode. And in that, I wonder if it's healthy for them in terms of like maintaining their sense of self that they would have as, you know, maybe working in a company that has a lot of female. Something that I'm thinking a lot about as like, you know, going through being like the mid-level now, and like you too, just kind of seeing how important it is to maintain that self of self, especially when you're starting a family and what you talked about with, you know, having kids, but also wanting to climb up the ladder.
Yeah, I know. It's just it's really challenging. And I also think there is this idea, which I think we're going to speak about like for a different episode, but sort of like the mean girl effect too, of like then when there is like one woman who has survived and gotten there, she feels like she's so freaking scared to lose her position, and she's like hanging on by her freaking fingernails that she can't even really reach out enough to bring up another woman.
Also, like, she's gone through all that.
She's
so,
gone
like,
through
why
all of
can't
it
you?
exactly like herself, and she feels like it's maybe a badge of honor, or she feels like maybe if you aren't able to do that, maybe you don't deserve to be here. But like men who are naturally getting there are all getting help, and the answer is like there's that's why there are so many more men, because if there's only one woman in this entire company that can survive alone without help, like that's why there's only one. The answer is 99% of people can't do that. That doesn't mean they're not qualified, but it does mean that like they do need some help from senior leadership to get promoted. And like that's not a bad thing. It's honestly a good thing.
Yeah.
And like the answer is, even though it is so much pressure to put on a female, because like the answer is men aren't really measured by mentorship at all. And they're not expected to mentor ever. And if they do, it's looked at so positively. It's almost looked at like how moms and dads are like, you know, literally like just absolutely judged in such different roles. Like literally men are like not expected to father, but if they do anything, they're like father of the year.
Yeah, exactly.
They're literally not expected to show up to anything or do anything, and they show up to like one thing and you're like, oh my god, father of the year. Women are expected to fucking just sacrifice their bodies, lives, hours of the day
while also working,
while also maintaining their like relationship, and like they do anything wrong and they're absolutely judged for it. And it's like those sort of societal expectations are also put on like senior leaders, and it's a really hard thing to separate. And I think like actually a really interesting fact I also read in this McKinsey study was women are promoted based on their past accomplishments and men are promoted based on their potential. Which I think is so hard, because obviously like your past accomplishments aren't really in your control. When you're a junior person, you're just doing what you're being told to do, and if you're super successful, that can only get you so far. You need to be promoted just like based on your potential, otherwise you won't get promoted, because obviously you haven't had the opportunity to do like the things you do as a senior person until you're there. And that's also really challenging for women. And it kind of sounds like this is what happened to Beth, where like honestly she was so successful, she was so incredible, she was so brilliant. Like that quote where it was like she could absolutely explain anything. She could literally explain a financial term in a haiku, which she literally did as a joke. Like literally they actually asked her if she could do it as a joke, and she did it, which is insane. But like, she didn't get promoted based on this like weird idea, which I feel like is like potential. Or like any man would have been promoted because they felt like he had potential, and instead they only judged her on her past. And that's a literal impossible thing to do. Like if you've never been a CEO before, which like you have to be CEO first, how could you possibly say that? And I think that's like a huge barrier too.
And I kind of feel like in that instance too, like if she had been promoted to CFO, they're losing a female figure in the financing group as well. So I feel like they were probably scared to like lose someone with so much experience to a management position that like theoretically a man could do. So I think, women are definitely held to a higher standard, and people expect a lot more from them. And then if they fail, then it's more serious. Affect.
I wonder if that's also sort of like a glass clip idea too, where like the financing group is obviously like that is very much like solving bad problems. Like debt is like the entire attitude is like, what's the fucking worst case scenario? Like what can we solve? What can we patch up? What can we fix? And that is like this idea of like promoting women as well. Like when your company's literally like diving off a cliff, maybe they felt like her like female attributes were a better fit for that than for like the CFO of the whole of Goldman, which they wanted someone to be, I guess, more like aggressive, which I think is really interesting. And so now I guess she's going to like this treasury group, and I'm like, honestly, like that they probably appreciate her way more.
Exactly.
I also like have read too, like kind of like this 2-year rule, like in any job in 2 years you need to be up or out, because like actually like people who hop jobs make like 50% more income.
I have heard that.
50% more income over their career about every 2 years. So it's actually, so like she stayed there for 30 years. I'm sure she was very appreciated, but she's probably going to make way more money in her next role. So
and I feel like we talked a little bit about like leadership within these investment groups. And with Goldman, for example, they have their investment banking group, they have their trading group, and then they have the platform solutions, which is kind of like, I guess, wealth management, PE, as we talked about, venture, etc. And right now it's run by this woman. It's the only group run by a woman named Stephanie Cohen. She's also been at Goldman for a long time, also very brilliant. And she's really well known for starting this initiative called Launch with GS, where they committed $1 billion for businesses that are founded by minority and female entrepreneurs and small businesses around the city. And this has been going on for a couple of years. And I remember reading, and it was coincidentally around the same time that Hammock had stepped down. And the group just kind of like stopped existing online. There was like, normally I feel like if something like this is achieved in terms of like the $1 billion goal being achieved, then there's so much press, right?
Yeah,
like,
also like, why don't we have a single female founder who's like speaking about it? Like, is there a single portfolio company? Like, there's not a single CEO having an interview being like, Goldman invested in me.
No article, and it just kind of stopped.
It's like so sketchy.
And the lady who was running the program, and she's also a 17-year-old Goldman vet, also just mysteriously quit that week, actually.
Yeah.
Which is
something's
crazy.
going down there. Like, I think they honestly just scrapped the program and they're just not talking about it.
Right.
Because like what the goal being reached, like maybe that goal was adjusted.
Who knows?
You know, it's like literally like when companies aren't doing well and they're like, we hit our budget, and you're like, this isn't the budget you promised before. Like, you know, it's like, what definition of budget are you saying? Yeah, because it's like, I know, and I guess that's also just really indicative of like where Goldman has its priorities. Like, I understand when it was a bull market and they were just absolutely like bleeding money. Like, they were literally printing money like nothing. They were like, oh yeah, invest in some women. But then like as soon as they were going through troubled times, they were like, scrap.
Right.
And they're like not a priority.
And the fact that the Platform Solutions group also had Marcus, which we know did not end up very well. And the fact that she was kind of leading all of that. And I know it's kind of getting merged with like the commercial banking now. And I don't know if she's like going to lose her seat. It definitely is really interesting to just kind of see from, you know, top down level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like, you know, I think Jane Fraser right now, CEO of Citi, like I think she's doing a great job, obviously, because Citi was obviously had some issues, but I mean, she laid off like 30,000 people. Yeah. She also eliminated a lot of their commercial banking problems that like, she actually was head of commercial banking before, but it just isn't a good, I think the market is realizing these investment banks that were expanding into commercial that weren't traditionally commercial banks before are having problems. Yeah. And it actually should be really refocusing on their core product.
On the strategy.
So she's on divesting from that.
Right. And I feel really bad for Citi and I guess Jane Fraser because she is obviously very brilliant. She's the first female CEO of a bank on Wall Street. But now she's getting really criticized because every single quarter, every single earning, she's firing a bunch of people. And she's really emphasizing operational efficiency. But that's the condition that she was brought into. It's not like she hired all these people beforehand. And I think she's doing the best that she can in this current circumstance. And she was brought in, like, under the assumption she would cut a lot. Right. And, like, the answer is, like, she's literally trying to deliver value to shareholders. And that's what she's held to. And I'm sure, like, when men fire people, it is completely different. Celebrated.
Like, men are like celebrated for being like hard-nosed, for having a smart businessman, for making tough decisions, and like women are not celebrated for making tough decisions, which is the definition of leadership. And I think we need to like change our expectations around that. Where like actually, especially considering this phenomenon, and women are often brought in when things are not going well. Women should be celebrated for making the hard decision because the answer is if they're not doing their job. Right.
And on that, I guess like I read an article on Fortune a couple of weeks ago, and the average tenure for a female CEO for these Fortune 500 companies is like 4.5 years. Versus for male CEOs, it's double that. I think it's almost 9 years. Wow. And that's because what we were talking about, the glass ceiling. If women are brought into these situations where it's harder to lead, of course the tenure is going to be shorter than their male counterparts.
Yeah. So. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, no, I think this is such an interesting phenomenon. I think it's something we need to continue to just watch. Yeah. And hope that, you know, I think society sort of just changes our viewpoint on female leadership and we're able to encourage that.
I feel like in terms of implications for companies, I know we've been in the workforce for a number of years now. And even from when we were starting to enter the workforce to now, I feel like a lot of these big companies within finance or outside are really valuing diversity. And so I know there's a ton of diversity programs female student programs that get these minority groups into these corporate type of settings. So I think companies are doing really well in terms of recruiting, but this is what we were talking about with retention. So I feel like moving forward, it's really important to target these like middle level executives and just kind of focus on mentorship.
Yeah.
And then figuring out a program once you get your foot in the door, how to progress.
I agree completely. And like how to continue that. And I think also just changing this idea of like potential and accomplishment. I think women should be promoted based on their potential too.
Yeah.
Because the answer is like potential is why you're promoted. Obviously, part of that is your past accomplishment, but you can't judge someone based on their past accomplishment when they haven't had that role yet. And that's completely, and that's why and also I think having more transparency and clear sort of like almost like KPIs for promotion, where like a lot of promotion is just very opaque.
Right.
And completely like non-transparent. And the companies that tend to have like the most women in leadership usually have very like hard and fast rules around promotion. Like I know like one of the VC firms that has like a relatively high percentage of female partners, the only way you get promoted to partner is if you have a certain level of like dollar amount return for like your entire, like basically just
it should be measurable.
Yeah. And they're like, if you hit this dollar amount, you get promoted.
Right.
Which is like, that's fascinating. I don't know how, like maybe that's not the best idea because honestly, like people management is like different. But like, I think if it is like being just like a VC partner, like maybe there should be just like honestly really specific like metric like that. And like at least it feels like there is a very direct line to being promoted.
Yeah.
Versus just a lot of other like just bias and like just like vibes. Like I feel like people are just like promoted on vibes like half the time. Like they were just like, I don't know. Like I was just promoted on vibes. Like literally. And that's if we continue to do that, like women won't get promoted.
Yeah. And that's really interesting, the fact that there are so many female partners at that venture fund because it was only based on numbers.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if that weren't the case, like
it would not be that way.
It would not be that way.
Yeah. And I think we're kind of like is seeing what happened at Goldman. Like if Beth Hammond had like a specific metric of been like, okay, like we're gonna make you head of financing, you do these 5 things, you accomplish it, we'll promote you. Obviously C-suite is more complicated because people have to leave. But like if you hit these 5 metrics, like we'll reward you, whatever. She would have been. It's like every goal she was put in front of her, she did accomplish. But I'm sorry, but like her literal vibe, like her literal swagger was not what they liked.
Right. And the fact that like they were like, you need more experience after 30 years of experience.
And she's like, okay, like you're fucking mansplaining me my job right now. And so honestly, Beth Hammond, I don't know. I think she's a badass. She's such a badass.
She's awesome.
She's amazing. And like honestly, I think her haiku should go viral. I want to hear her fucking finance haiku. Honestly.
Yeah, a man could not do that.
I could not do that. It's amazing. Awesome. Well, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. And to next week.